Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilvin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and this is already part 13 of my journey to Unguro card review. This time around, I actually have 6 new cards, so quite a handful of cards to get through here, including the new Paladin Legendary Quest and a few other class cards that look pretty interesting as well. So let's go ahead and jump right into the Paladin Quest. This is the Last Kaleidosaur. Now, Galvadon over there, the reward for this quest was teased and leaked a pretty long time ago. It's been confirmed. The leak was correct. They got it right. But until yesterday, we hadn't seen the actual quest itself. So, like every other quest, 1-mana spell. The condition to complete this quest, you have to cast 6 spells on your minions. So that means an actual targeted spell from hand has to hit one of your minions. Now, I think 99% of the time that's going to be a buff. I suppose theoretically you could Hammer of Wrath your own minion in order to trigger this quest. Wouldn't be the most efficient play ever, but obviously the design here is to encourage a buffing style of play. Now, it's already been confirmed that hand buffs that go the other direction, that go from the board to your hand, do not activate this quest. So it's a little bit at odds with what Blizzard was trying to do in the previous expansion with the hand buff mechanic. This instead is all about board buffs, which has really been Paladin's strong suit historically anyway, so this is sort of a return to form. Of course, the reward, as mentioned, is Galvadon for this quest. So let's talk about Galvadon first, because who cares if the quest is completable or not if the reward sucks. I don't think Galvadon sucks, though. I think he's really, really intriguing. 5 mana, 5/5, obviously nothing exciting there. The fact that he's a beast is probably not typically going to be super relevant. But this battle cry, adapt 5 times. So what that means is you're going to play him. I don't know how exactly it's going to work, but presumably you'll get the first adapt, which is one of 3 choices. You'll pick it, get a second one of 3 choices, so on and so forth through the 5th time. So theoretically you could get the same adapt option 5 times in a row. In other words, you could do +3 attack 5 times to make this a 25 minion. Now, that probably wouldn't be recommended because it'd just be a 5 health minion that would die. But what if you did +3 attack 4 times and then gave it can't be targeted by spells or hero power? Suddenly you'd have, a 17 attack minion that was much more difficult for your opponent to kill. What if you gave it taunt and +3 health 4 times? You'd have a 5/17 taunt that your opponent pretty much couldn't clear unless they had some sort of all-encompassing board wipe like Twisting Nether. It takes so many minion resources to get through there. What if you go even further and you make a 5/14 taunt with Wind Fury that can't be targeted by spells or hero powers? I hope I didn't go too far, but I think that's right. I think that's still 5 options. Then you have a 5/14 taunt that your opponent still can't kill, a little mini Sogoth the Slitherer that would still provide a lot of issues. And now it's attacking for 10 every turn in your opponent's face. You could also do stuff like give it Wind Fury, +3 attack 3 times, so it'd be a 14 attack minion, and then give it stealth, so that you've planted a basically combo kill card immediately if your opponent doesn't play a taunt or somehow magically get back to 30 health. So all kinds of crazy stuff you can do with Galvadon. He is the kind of card that is a win condition all on his own. Not to mention with things like Wind Fury, if you're already running a deck that has a lot of buff mechanics, you could cast Blessing of Kings on Galvadon the following turn after you stealthed and Wind Furied him to double that damage even more, right? So a lot of potential here for this card. It's going to be a game-changing kind of play when Galvadon comes out. It may not be as kind of big as some of the other quest rewards we've seen where you get like a bajillion different minions or it lasts the whole course of the game. But Galvadon is strong enough that he can be a game-winning play on turn 5 as long as you understand the board state, your opponent, and you adapt correctly. Galvadon is going to be a force to be reckoned with. The real challenge, though, of course, is that you have to complete the quest. And really, Paladin hasn't had a lot of success buffing minions in the past. Now, clearly, cards like Blessing of Kings have been included in constructed decks, and that's a fine card. There's a lot of other buff cards we've seen, the Blessing of Mights and those kinds of things, that have had far less popularity but occasionally pop up. None of the Paladin buff cards right now are absolutely terrible, I would argue. They're all, to some extent, playable. They've just never really fit into a deck or all been bundled together. But the Last Kaleidosaur certainly encourages that style of play. So it looks like there's going to be some sort of all-in Paladin, probably with a lot of low-curve minions, a lot of buff spells to buff them, really aggressive starts. Try to activate your Last Kaleidosaur as soon as possible, and then get your Galvadon, sort of the mid-game finisher, mid to late game finisher probably, that secures the game before you run out of gas and before you run out of cards. So sort of an aggro Paladin with Galvadon as its final piece. There's alternatively maybe a slower version of Paladin that just runs some spells to buff 1/1s and maybe a mid-range Paladin. I don't know exactly what the kind of deck is going to look like, but I think it is possible. I think it's possible. And before I actually go on that point, I want to jump to the next card in this review because it's actually one of the cards that makes me think a buff Paladin deck, maybe a slower one in particular, is actually possible. Check this out. This is the Spikeridged Steed, a new Paladin spell at 6 mana. This gives a minion +2/+6, so 8 total stats, very similar to Blessing of Kings, but it also gives it Taunt. And when that minion dies, the minion that you just buffed, you also get to summon a Stegodon. And I didn't include an image of the Stegodon here, but the Stegodon is a 2/6 minion also with Taunt. So essentially you're giving whatever minion you buff a mount, a Stegodon mount. They're riding the mount, they get killed, the mount survives as its own 2/6 with Taunt. So essentially this is 4/12 in total stats, both of which are going to have Taunt, both parts of which are going to have Taunt. A 4/12 for 6 mana is very, very undercosted as far as stats are concerned. Not to mention the +2/+6 aspect essentially gets charged because you're giving it to a minion on the board, presumably allowing it to attack immediately. Since it has Taunt also, it is a more active kind of card because it's forcing your opponents to react to it as opposed to just leaving it sit there like something like Blessing of Kings might do. So even if you play this with a minion in hand, it's still going to get some instant value on the board thanks to that Taunt. And then of course the Death Rattle effect, the new Stegodon, is also a nice little 2/6 Taunt. So it seems like this could actually work relatively well in more of a mid-range or even control style buff-based Paladin that still relies on summoning Galvadon to win the game. And I think this card, in that environment, is pretty good. I still don't know that this actually makes the cut in other Paladin decks, but the problem right now, of course, is that we don't know what Paladin decks are. We are losing Anyfin Paladin, so that's not a deck. N'Zoth Paladin theoretically is still a thing. This is a card that could work okay in a late-game deck just because it slows down your opponents and gives you value. So this is a great way to encourage the Last Kaleidosaur. Another buff that's really strong. It opens up the options for probably what kinds of decks can support this quest. On its own, I think still a reasonably high value and high efficiency card, but still not one I'm sure gets played a lot just because I don't really know where it fits. So that said, let's go ahead and move on to some of the other class cards in this review. Up first is Evolving Spores, a new 4-mana druid spell. It probably takes the cake for one of the most boring artworks in the game. I mean, it's a cool-looking mushroom, no doubt. It's got some nice lighting. Not much is going on, and it's certainly not as cartoony as some of the other Hearthstone artwork we've seen lately. But anyway, this spell will adapt your minions. So any minions you have on board, you get to choose an adaptation for them. Of the 10, you're going to get 3 to choose from. So there's a couple issues, I think, with this card. First and foremost is there's already a card called Soul of the Forest, which basically adapts your minions in a really nice way. It gives them all a Death Rattle summon a 2/2. Of course, one of the adaptation options is to summon 2 1/1s, but I think I'd rather have summoning 2/2s as opposed to multiple 1/1s simply because they don't die to whirlwind style effects or ping effects quite as easily. So this already competes with Soul of the Forest head to head and loses in one regard. And really, this is the kind of card I think fits best in a token style or egg style druid deck where you're trying to summon a lot of minions because you really need probably 3 to 4 minions to make Evolving Spores worth it in the first place. If you just do this on 2 or 3 minions, you're not going to get enough value back. Adaptations are really maybe 1 to 1.5 mana each. So you need 3 to 4 minions for this to feel like a great card. So Druid's not typically fantastic at going wide on the board unless they're playing token or egg style decks. So I think it has to be relegated to that specifically. Clearly you can adapt Jades. Druids do go wide on the board with Jades, but if you're already wide on the board with Jades, and you got like a 6/6, 7/7, 8/8 Jade, you're probably going to win the game anyway. So being able to give those guys Wind Fury is really just a win more situation, and I don't think that's going to help Jade. I don't think this is a card that makes the cut in Jade Druid. And really, in essence, this is just a win more card in general, right? It requires you to have a board already established. And the thing about Soul of the Forest is it's a win more cards in some ways, but it's also sort of a backup plan, sort of a last resort. If your opponent does clear your board, guess what? There's still more stuff to come. This can be that if you get the Death Rattle, but again, in a worse way. Every other time, it's just a win more card that I don't know really supports any Druid deck archetype that would like it better than the cards that already exist. For instance, Mark of the Lotus is a 1 mana spell that gives +1/+1 to all your minions. This could be a 4 mana spell that gives +1/+1 to all your minions. Which one do you choose to run? That's what I thought. So yeah, this could be sort of a Bloodlust with the +3 attack. It can be sort of a Savage Roar too, but probably closer to Bloodlust in its effect. There's all kinds of ways to compare this card, but really, in the end, I think it's a little too awkward. It's focused too much on a game state that's already successful for you to have minions. So if you don't have minions, it's just a totally dead draw. It doesn't fit necessarily any of the Druid decks better than what already exists for those decks, so I don't see anything being cut to fit Evolving Spores. So I don't really think this card is going to work all that well for Druid. It's not fundamentally terrible from a mana efficiency standpoint or an effect standpoint. It's got something it can do. It's just there's better stuff out there. So let's move on to the next card. This is the Shaman spell Spirit Echo. 3 mana spell. It gives your minions Death Rattle. Return this minion to your hand. So you play 3 or 4 things out on the board. You got a couple totems. You cast Spirit Echo. All of those things now have a Death Rattle effect. And anytime they're killed by your opponent, guess what? You get that minion back. So this is kind of card draw / card generation. And it's going to give you only cards back which are on the board. So just like I was talking about before, sort of win more cards versus backup resorts or last resort type cards, backup playing cards. Spirit Echo is another one of those sort of backup playing cards that can also be a win more card. Once you develop a board, if your opponent does have some sort of magical board clear, as long as you've casted Spirit Echo onto your board, guess what? You can just reload once again. And that's really nice, right? We've seen other cards like this before, like Echo of Medivh in Mage, back in Goblins vs. Gnomes, I think it was, which was actually a pretty valuable card. That was played with all kinds of gimmicky stuff, particularly things like Molten Giant, where you could get down to low health with an Ice Block in tow, play multiple Molten Giants, Echo of Medivh, get Molten Giants again, play those Molten Giants for free, and do all kinds of crazy stuff. And that's really where this card would succeed as well, as any kinds of cards that have some sort of mana reduction thing, like Arcane Giant or Thing from Below, works really well because you can get multiple copies, and they've already been mana reduced, right, if they have a permanent mana reduction anyway, and you can play them again for free. It works really well with other Death Rattle cards, right, because typically those have nice effects. It works even well with Battlecry cards. Essentially any card with text, you're going to get to use that text again. It lengthens the depth of your deck, which is really nice because you just get more resources and fewer cards. It works with Murlocs in particular, as you can probably tell from the artwork. I think that may have been the thought behind this card, is that, gosh, you can make multiple Murloc War Leaders, and that's really good. You can make multiple Finjas. So whether it's sort of an all-in Murloc deck with all kinds of Murlocs, if you go wide on the board and you're able to just double all your Murlocs next turn, or once your opponent deals with them, that's awesome. Multiple War Leaders is nuts, but I don't think it has to be Murloc. Certainly, it could be almost anything to make this work. The risks here are, of course, silence effects. Your opponent can silence off that Death Rattle. You are giving them a little bit of control over when they kill your stuff, so you may not get the cards back right when you need them. But I think those are both okay. Like, stuff has to die. If they don't kill your minions are going to get value on the board. And there's just not that much silence in the game right now. Sure, Mass Dispel or whatever, or Devolve would wreck your board, but unless that is supported by the meta at large, where everybody has to run that stuff just because the meta is so filled with junk that's bad against it, that's probably not going to be a problem either. So I actually like this card quite a bit. I think it's a cool little card draw card. It's Arcane Intellect with a twist. And it has a lot of implications with all kinds of Shaman decks, and we know Shaman really doesn't have trouble getting minions out onto the board. Every time you look up, it seems like Shaman somehow just developed 4 new minions. So I think this will be the kind of card that it's easy to get value, easy to get a return from. So I like Spirit Echo quite a bit, and I think this is going to see some play. Maybe not in every Shaman deck, but there's going to be those out there that find a home for it. So let's move on to the second to last card here. This is a new warrior minion, the Cornered Sentry, a 2-mana 2/6 with Taunt. So a nice body there for 2 mana, particularly with Taunt to slow down some aggression. But it has a nasty little battle cry. Summon 3 1/1 raptors for your opponent. So you play this guy, your opponent's going to get 3 1/1s. You think about it as far as like trading value, if those all traded into your Cornered Sentry immediately, then this would be about a 2/3 for 2 with Taunt, which would be basically a vanilla, fairly statted minion. So worst case scenario, you play this, they get some minions. I shouldn't say worst case scenario, but maybe the expected scenario. You play this, they get some raptors, they trade into it, you're left with a 2/3 Taunt, you played for 2 mana. That's okay. Certainly not a great play, but it's fine. It might help slow down some early aggression from your opponent's other minions as well. Best case scenario, though, you have a Whirlwind effect queued up because you're a warrior, and warrior has a million different kinds of ways to Whirlwind, Ravaging Ghoul, Whirlwind itself, anything else that shows up. You play Cornered Sentry, you coin out a Whirlwind, now you have a 2/5 for 2 that's also really good at destroying your opponent's early game board. So that's really the expectation for this card. Probably when you do that, you're going to also catch their patches and their Southsea deckhand, right? So not only are you going to kill the raptors, but you probably wanted to Whirlwind anyway. So this is a nice little early game counter aggression kind of card, which I think is pretty neat. I don't really see a lot of combo potential or anything like that with it. There are some downsides, of course. You play this for Hunter and you don't have an answer right away. They can utilize that beast energy to do cool stuff, but that's not going to be a super likely problem. If you're expecting to run this card, you're going to have the Whirlwind effects to answer it. You're going to have what you need to make it work. And of course, you always have control. You can wait to play this. If it doesn't work on 2 because you don't have an answer, wait till turn 5 when you can combo it with a Ravaging Ghoul, right? Like, there's ways to do that. You're going to have full control over when you play this, so you don't have to risk that downside nearly as much. So that said, I think this will be a playable card if you're trying to do a Taunt Warrior, which we still haven't really seen work, or if you just need some sort of anti-aggressive tech, this could be it. I like Cornered Sentry just fine. I think it's a reasonably good card. That said, it's certainly not going to fit into every warrior deck or just be, synonymous with the class, but it has a place. It's just fine. So let's move on to the final card, the Tortollan Primalist. This guy. First off, awesome artwork. I love this turtle. He's so cool. But this is an 8-mana minion. It's 5/4 in stats, and it has a battle cry, discover a spell and cast it with random targets. So really, this is mini baby turtle Yogg-Saron. The Tortollan Primalist is a little Yogg-Saron. And certainly not as powerful as Yogg-Saron because you're only going to be casting 1 spell, right? But you do get to discover the spell, right? So you're going to have at least some limited control over what happens. It's still going to be random. It's still going to, you don't want to pick Fireball with 6 health because it might just Fireball your face. But, some spells probably, depending on the class and depending on what's available, like Mass Dispel, for instance, it doesn't matter what random targets. I think it's just the way the spell works. If it's choosable by this card, it's just going to impact the board. So there might be some net positives occasionally from this card. But all that said, I don't really think it matters. This card is way too expensive for its effect, and it has terrible stats to go with it. You just can't afford to spend 8 mana on a super random effect like this, particularly that can backfire. There's just too much variability in this card, not enough reliability, and the stats don't support the cost. So Servant of Yogg-Saron is actually a kind of similar card at 5 mana for Mage. Even at 5 mana, that card with the exact same body is virtually unplayable because it's just too risky and you don't get enough upside. So Tortollan Primalist, unless I'm missing something about this, which I really don't think I am, seems just like a meme card, a goof card, a highlight card that's not going to find his way into any sort of competitive list, which is unfortunate because I absolutely love this artwork. This little turtle is certainly praising Yogg. So that said, I think that's going to do it for my review. That was 6 cards. Pretty exciting stuff. New Paladin Quest is pretty cool. I think it'll be reasonably playable. We'll have to wait and see if a deck really fits it, but Galvadon's pretty nice. Spikeridged Steed, again, reasonably playable card, but it'll have to find a deck to support it. Evolving Spores, I really don't think is going to be played. I think it's okay, but it just won't find a home. Spirit Echo, nice little card. I think this one's going to be played in a variety of decks. Cornered Sentry could certainly be a nice tech card for aggro. And Tortollan Primalist is Meme Lord Yogg-Saron praising Turtle, so he certainly won't be played. That said, if you guys have any thoughts, comments, or questions, if you want to tell me something I got absolutely wrong about these cards, you know where to leave your thoughts in the comments below. I certainly love reading everything you guys have to say. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, game on.